Street art is the most exciting and important movement happening in the visual arts today. And regardless, if you're someone who has never visited an art gallery or a museum, or if you're someone like myself who's deeply embedded in the visual arts, it's impacting you on a daily basis, whether you realize it or not. It was only a few years ago that I was doing a study looking at art education within the university context. And I wanted to compare this education with what was happening outside this ivory tower. And so I looked at a particular street art because I thought they were as far as could be from the university context. Well, during that process, I read everything that I could on street art, investigated and interviewed street artists along the way, and they broke every stereotype and assumptions that I had about who they are and why they created what they did. See, street art lives in the corners of our community, the sidewalks, the sides of buildings, the backs of stop signs are these amazing displays of creativity and an artistic community that comes together. But it's also giant murals on the sides of buildings that just set you back. But street art is also behind some of the major marketing campaigns for your favorite Hollywood blockbuster film, a clothing company that you're wearing, or perhaps maybe even a Disney store, which is hard to believe. We even see it on television now. And I started investigating and visiting with these artists, and I bribed a friend of mine to visit an art gallery. And it was in the Echo Park area of Los Angeles, and it featured the art of Shepard Fairey. Now, Shepard Fairey is a very well-known street artist, and we traveled down to the area, and we got there a few minutes early before the show opened, thinking that we can take in the exhibit and perhaps get home early. Was I ever wrong? There was a line that stretched several hundred yards down the block. We got in the back of that line, and about 2 hours later did we get in to see the art show. 2 hours to see an art show. And then once inside, there were more lines to buy posters, prints, stickers, and books. It was amazing. The enthusiasm for this subculture was exhilarating. So as you go around, street art isn't exactly what you think it is. When you look at this image, it's a simple mosaic in the corner of this business. It's actually by an artist named Invader. And he uses the aesthetics of the 1980s video game Space Invaders to comment on how advertising is invading our public space. And he places these throughout the neighborhoods or cities, and he calls them invasions. But street artists can also have fun. You know, these are concrete dividers that prohibit cars or vehicles from entering the sidewalk. And one got knocked over and it was uprooted out of the blacktop, and an artist came along and personified them. You can see one is very shocked that the other one, unfortunately, has died. But street art is also big, it's bold, it's beautiful. The technical abilities of these artists are just astonishing. It's also political. Perhaps one of the most famous walls in history, the Berlin Wall, has been painted by a number of artists and now is on display on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. See, the thing I'm trying to emphasize is street art is a global movement. We have access to walls around the world. It's colorful, it's bright, it's fun. But it does help to know how we got here. And a few easy steps through Western art history can contextualize what's happening. It was the Renaissance where we had art with a capital A. It's the first time artists were not craftsmen, but they were soul geniuses, creating sculptures and paintings that were realistic. And so we have two famous examples here of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. And for hundreds of years after this point, art academies were established around the world that collected this knowledge base and wanted to impart it to students. And if you went through a system like this, you were creating realistic work that was painting or sculpture. It was a hard and fast tradition, and that's what art was. But something happened in the Industrial Revolution during the 19th century, where it changed the way we thought about everything, communication, travel, including the way we made art. So the Impressionists are a great example of this because they're looking at the landscape and they're breaking it down to short brushstrokes. It's an impression of a sunrise. We go further to artists like Vincent van Gogh, who are taking feelings from within and then imparting it on a landscape. So it becomes a much more expressionistic view of reality. It's not long before an artist named Pablo Picasso, perhaps one of the most famous artists of the 20th century, that was looking at still lifes, people, whatever have you, and breaking them down geometrically into abstract shapes. So it was altering reality to get to something we call abstraction. Jackson Pollock is perhaps the most famous example of this. Abstract expressionism. It's abstract and it comes from within. It's not even representing reality altogether. Well, you get the story here. As modernism progresses through the 20th century, we get further away from what that tradition of the art academy and making work realistic, till eventually you get to work like Bridget Riley's, and you can't tell if it's art at all. Optical art. But it was Andy Warhol that really made the biggest difference with modern art. He created this sculpture called the Brillo box. And it did two things to modern art that changed the way we view art forever. One, you had to have some kind of prior knowledge that this was art. Because the Brillo box looked exactly like the Brillo box you'd find in a grocery store. You couldn't tell the difference. Or, number two, you needed the context of the gallery or museum to know it was a work of art. Those are pretty frustrating characteristics for folks not inside the art world. To have that prior knowledge or to need a pedestal, a frame, or a white-walled gallery to know it's a work of art. The thing I love about street art, you don't need any of that to know it's a work of art. You come upon it, you know it's a work of art the moment you see it. You don't need prior knowledge, and you certainly don't need the gallery space. When you're walking down the streets of Philadelphia, you know this to be a work of art. When you're on your daily commute and you park in the parking lot, this work meets you where we live. It's why it's called the art of the people. This Ron English mural in Los Angeles is one of the most Instagram photos that we have. And I know you like this work because you share it on social media. You take pictures of it, you hashtag it. It's incredibly relevant. In fact, most people view street art through the lens of a camera, the computer, or your phone. This is a piece by Banksy. He's perhaps one of the most famous street artists in the world. And on a visit to Los Angeles, there was this boarded up building that obviously had some fire damage. And he took this stencil of Charlie Brown, the famous Peanuts character, and gave him a little gasoline can and a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. So Charlie Brown's up to no good in this image. Well, you put something out like this in public, folks want it. Someone went out of their way to cut this out of the side of the building in order to preserve it, keep it, sell it. See, the thing is, street art, it just doesn't even remain there. Folks want it so much that they want to take it with them. But one of my favorite things about street art is just walking down the street. It's a bit like a scavenger hunt when you come across something that doesn't belong there. It makes you smile. And that's part of the joy of all of this. Now, the United States is representative, I think, of a lot of countries and how artists are treated and how they're educated. And the last census in 2008 showed that there were just over 2 million artists working in this country. Comparatively, there's 1 million lawyers. And it always feels like I meet more lawyers than artists. But there's 2 million, 2 to 1. And what we found is those artists are incredibly educated. They have bachelor's and master's degrees. The frustrating part is about 35% of them are unemployed. Now, when we live in a country and a society where we have tons and tons of artists graduating with bachelor's and master's degrees in the arts, it's frustrating that there isn't an infrastructure to support these artists. There's not enough galleries, nonprofits, and design spaces for all the artists that are out there. And so street art has made a way for these artists to take their work directly to the consumers, their fans, anyone who is out there who wants to consume this work. I love this piece by Desire Obtain Cherish because it speaks to this. It says, "Who needs a gallery when I can paint here for free?" And it's never been more true with street art. However, when I say street art, you usually think graffiti. This is illegal. It's something we're trying to clean up from society. We don't want it. It's ugly, etc. Well, that's partially true. Street art is related to graffiti, but there are some interesting differences. And I love this Venn diagram because it displays in how street art is related to graffiti, but also how it's different. So there's 4 categories. The first is graffiti writing. The second, artistic graffiti writing. Third, artistic graffiti. And finally, you come to something called street art. So it is related. Graffiti writing is when you write letters over and over. It's typically with a spray can, and you're trying to get exposure. You're trying to get your name across. Now, artistic graffiti writing is when you add the elements and principles of design to that writing. There's more form, there's more color. You can tell it takes a lot more time. This is not something that is done quickly. Now, artistic graffiti is different. The letters fall away from it. The visual image is what is important. If there are letters at all, they're subservient to the message of the image. And this is an artist named Kenny Scharf who came about in the 1980s, very influenced by graffiti, but then took it in another direction. Now, street art involves every possible media of art school, whether it's yarn, any kind of sculpture material, plastics, and one of the most popular is wheat paste or postering. That's the difference in terms of street art. It doesn't use the spray cane in the same way. And in fact, street art also takes advantage of context. So whether it's a hot summer afternoon in Texas or that sewer grate that kind of looks like someone smoking, street art takes advantage of those locales. And you can learn a lot about where street art is placed. There are a number of illegal billboards in every city. It's amazing, and sometimes they're grandfathered into the system if they're there long enough. And this piece by Benjamin Alejandro questions that. It questions the assumption whether it should be there at all, asking if this is illegal. Also a nice nod to the Mona Lisa and what art is. Also, the use of groups is something I found fascinating. Typically in the university, we think of art done by one person. And so many street artists are part of collectives or crews or groups where they take advantage of the skill set of each individual member, combine them, and do things that individually they couldn't do on their own. This is a group called Circle, and they knew this photograph would outlast the actual mural, so they even painted the telephone pole in front of it so it would last longer in the image and look completely sharp. There's also particular locations in every city, a bit like bulletin boards where artwork is facilitated and it isn't taken down. And it's a bit like the front page of the newspaper. It's the current events. It's the gossip that's happening. And when you look at them, you can see which artists respect each other, there's conversations happening, and which ones work with each other. And this also wouldn't be possible without supporters from the community, whether it's art galleries and museums, blogs, websites, newspapers, critics, and journalists. They're all there to deepen an inquiry and engagement with works of art like this. There's even street art curators that go around our cities and they secure walls so that artists can paint for free or legally or even get paid to paint. And I love, one of my favorite examples is this middle school in Miami that wanted to reflect the type of work that was happening inside the classrooms on the outside of the building. So rather than white walls, they invited dozens of artists to paint all around. And it really signifies that creative work happens in these spaces. Even Google has gotten behind this with their Google Street Art project, where they're digitizing thousands of pieces of street art around the world, knowing that these works will disappear. There isn't a museum to collect them and preserve them. And they're there for research purposes, but also for enjoyment. Now, when we look at one particular avenue, it gives you an example of how often it changes. This is Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles, and it's the very same wall. And you can see the different artists and the different aesthetics that have gone on in just this one place and how important it is to document them. So when we look at street art, it is a global movement. It's one that's pushing boundaries of what's possible. Street artists are pushing technical abilities and what you can do with a spray can. And in this example, we see paint that looks like chrome. But it doesn't always have to be big. It's about perspective. It can be very small to have that kind of impact. So when you're walking around your city and your local town and you notice the bare walls that typically grace our communities, and they just sort of beg for a little bit of color. And you look at our cities that look like shoeboxes turned up on their sides, because that's what they are. Think about what street art is doing. They're bringing art to the people, and they're fundamentally changing the way we engage the visual arts. Thank you very much.